I am Emma. I am 34 years old. Exactly 2 years ago, a single act of unbelievable entitlement, fueled by decades of toxic parenting, culminated in a catastrophic car crash that shattered my family and changed the trajectory of my life forever. While I was standing in the freezing, salty night air on a coastal highway, staring at a mangled, $4 million vintage supercar wrapped around the trunk of a massive oak tree, my own mother pointed her trembling finger directly at my face. Right in front of a police officer, right in front of the flashing red and blue sirens, she looked at the wreckage, looked at her drunk golden child son in handcuffs, and then looked at the cop. She gave him the keys, my mother screamed, her voice cracking with a manufactured, desperate hysteria. My daughter did this. She knew he had been drinking at the rehearsal dinner, and she gave him the keys to her father's rental car because she is a jealous, vindictive failure who wants to ruin her brother's life. She actually tried to frame me for grand theft auto, insurance fraud, and reckless endangerment. She was entirely willing to send her own daughter to state prison and saddle me with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit just to save her precious son from facing the consequences of his own horrific choices. She smiled a tiny, wicked, satisfied smile as the police officer took out his notepad, genuinely believing she had successfully thrown me under the bus for the 100th time in my entire life. But there was one massive, fatal detail my mother did not know. She didn't know about the high-definition, motion-activated hidden security cameras I had personally installed in the garage earlier that afternoon. And she most certainly did not know that the ultra-exclusive, multi-million-dollar luxury rental company she had just defrauded didn't belong to some faceless, corporate conglomerate. That company belonged to me. I was the majority shareholder. And right now, as I speak to you today, my mother is living in a cramped, damp one-bedroom apartment next to a noisy highway, completely bankrupt, begging me through voicemails to answer her calls. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my toxic family's web of lies with nothing but a flash drive and an ironclad commercial insurance policy, please hit that like button if you truly believe that the truth always comes to light, no matter how deeply it is buried. And please, let me know what city or country you are watching from in the comments below. We have an incredible community here, and I read every single one. Now, let's go back to where this absolute nightmare began. It was a crisp Thursday morning, exactly 2 days before my younger sister Mia's wedding. The air had that specific kind of biting cool you only get in late September in New England. I was standing inside the massive, detached, climate-controlled garage of the sprawling coastal manor my father, Arthur, had rented for the entire wedding weekend. The estate wasn't just a house, it was a compound, featuring a winding gravel driveway that looked like it belonged in a luxury watch commercial. I was currently wearing faded denim coveralls, and I had thick, black grease permanently settled under my fingernails despite scrubbing my hands raw with industrial soap for 20 minutes. I was doing a final, meticulous check on my own personal car. It was a classic Porsche 911. I had spent the last 5 years of my life restoring it from a rusted, abandoned shell into a gleaming, midnight blue masterpiece. It wasn't a checkbook build where I just paid some shop to do the work. I did the welding. I did the grueling hours of wet sanding. I rebuilt the carburetor and the engine block with my own 2 hands. Every single bolt on that beautiful machine had my sweat on it. It was my pride and joy, a physical, undeniable manifestation of the fact that I could build something incredibly valuable out of absolutely nothing. I was wiping down the chrome trim when I heard a rumble that made the concrete floor vibrate. It wasn't the tight, mechanical purr of my Porsche. It was the unmistakable, earth-shaking, throaty roar of a V12 engine. I walked out of the garage just as a specialized flatbed transport truck pulled up the long driveway. My father was standing there waiting for it. Dad and my mother, Eleanor, had been divorced for 15 incredibly bitter years. It was a messy, agonizing split that involved brutal custody battles, endless alimony disputes, and screaming matches over who got to keep the prime real estate. Dad had completely rebuilt his life and his fortune with a commercial construction empire. He was a strict, terrifyingly precise man who wore tailored navy suits that cost more than my entire first year's salary, and he had zero tolerance for excuses. Dad nodded at me as I approached. The transport driver lowered the hydraulic ramp, and there it was. A 1961 Ferrari 250 GT California. It was breathtaking. It was painted a flawless, liquid silver that seemed to absorb the morning sunlight, paired with a hand-stitched, blood-red leather interior. The curves of that car were iconic, a piece of rolling art that made modern supercars look like cheap plastic toys. "She is absolutely stunning, Dad," I said, my voice dropping a respectful octave as I stared at the engineering marvel. "She's a rental," Dad said, his voice clipped and serious. "For your sister." Mia wanted to drive away from the reception in something historically significant. I pulled a massive amount of strings and called in a lot of favors to secure this specific model from a private collector's specialty fleet. I walked around it, terrified to even breathe too heavily on the aluminum bodywork. "Do you have any idea what these are trading for at auction right now?" "Depending on the engine serial numbers, you are looking at $4 million, minimum." Dad nodded gravely. He opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. $4.2 million is the insured replacement value on the contract. Which brings me to the absolute rules of this weekend. He turned to face me fully, his expression leaving no room for negotiation. I signed the rental agreement personally. The insurance policy is incredibly specific, Emma. It is a commercial policy with a strict, non-negotiable authorized driver clause. I am the only authorized driver on this planet. He pointed a finger at the hood of the Ferrari. "I can drive it down the driveway to the main tent, they can sit in it for the exit photos, and I drive it right back into this garage. No joy rides. No taking it down to the harbor. If anyone else, literally anyone else, is behind that wheel and puts a single scratch on the paint, the commercial insurance policy is instantly voided. We are personally on the hook for the full $4.2 million. "Understood," I said, nodding firmly. "I mean it, Emma." "I need you to keep a close eye on it," Dad said, handing me a heavy, single silver key attached to a leather fob. "I have meetings with the caterers, and your mother is already causing massive headaches inside the main house. Put this key inside the wall safe in my temporary study. The code is 1-9-6-1. The year of the car. Do not give this key to the valet, do not give it to Mia, and under no circumstances do you let your brother anywhere near this vehicle. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear," I replied. Just as I pocketed the heavy key, a loud, rattling noise shattered the peaceful morning quiet. A beat-up local taxi, its muffler dragging and sparking against the gravel, sputtered up the driveway. It wasn't an Uber Black or a private car service. It was a filthy yellow cab. The passenger door swung open, and out stepped my younger brother, Leo. He was 25 years old, wearing a silk designer suit that was entirely too tight, expensive loafers with no socks, and a pair of oversized designer sunglasses despite the fact that we were in a shaded driveway. Leo was the golden child. While I used my grueling salary from the auto shop to pay my own rent and build my life, Leo had burned through his massive college fund on luxury trips to Tulum, VIP club tables, and a string of failed tech startups that always required emergency funding from our mother. Leo pulled a Louis Vuitton suitcase from the trunk and then turned to help his new girlfriend out of the cab. Her name was Chloe. She was stunningly beautiful, I will give him that, but she had her smartphone out before her designer heels even hit the gravel. She was a social media influencer, currently recording herself stepping out of the pathetic taxi, angling the camera upwards to capture the massive rented mansion behind us, instantly shifting her expression into a bright, entirely fake smile. "We have finally arrived at the family estate, you guys." I heard her chirp into the screen, completely lying to her thousands of followers. Before I could even roll my eyes, the front doors of the mansion burst open. My mother, Eleanor, rushed forward, practically shoving a poor caterer into the bushes to get to her son. She was wearing a floral dress that was slightly too loud and entirely too expensive for a Thursday morning. "Leo, darling. You made it," she cooed, wrapping her arms around him tightly. She then turned her beaming, predatory smile toward the influencer girlfriend. "And you must be Chloe. Welcome to our home. We are so thrilled to have you here." I winced. It wasn't our home. It was a rental. But my mother was already aggressively spinning the narrative to make us look like a dynasty of old money. I walked over to them, wiping my hands on a shop rag. "Hey, little brother," I said calmly. Leo looked at me, taking in my faded coveralls and my messy hair. He let out a performative, mocking laugh. "Emma, the grease monkey. Still playing in the dirt, I see. Chloe, this is my older sister, Emma. She fixes cars for a living." "I restore vintage automobiles," I corrected him, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Nice to meet you, Chloe." Chloe looked me up and down, saw my lack of designer labels, and instantly lost all interest. "Charmed," she muttered, looking past my shoulder. "Leo, babe, where are we staying? My ring light needs to charge." My mother turned her glare onto me. Her eyes narrowed with pure, unfiltered disgust. "Emma, why on earth are you covered in dirt? The guests will be arriving for the welcome luncheon in 3 hours. You look like the absolute help. Go wash up immediately. You are embarrassing us." I looked at the three of them. I saw the judgment, the superiority, and the deep, pathetic desperation to appear wealthy. They looked at my grease-stained hands and saw a servant. They saw the family scapegoat. They didn't know the truth. They had absolutely no idea what kind of power I was currently holding, and they had no idea what kind of unholy hell they were about to unleash on their own lives. To fully understand the sheer audacity of what was about to happen that weekend, you have to understand the deeply rooted, profoundly toxic family dynamic that had governed my entire existence. Growing up, the rules of our household were incredibly simple, yet devastatingly cruel. Leo got absolutely whatever he wanted, and I paid the price for it. I was the designated scapegoat, the shock absorber for all of my mother's anxieties and my brother's catastrophic failures. Leo was the baby, the sensitive soul, the creative genius who just needed a little more support. I was expected to be the adult before I even hit puberty. I vividly remembered the summer I turned 18. I had spent 2 grueling years working 2 jobs, waitressing late nights at a local diner and scrubbing floors at a greasy auto repair shop, to save up a modest college fund. I wanted to get a degree in mechanical engineering. I had managed to scrape together enough for my first 2 semesters, and I even bought a beat-up, rust-spotted Honda Civic for $2,000 so I could commute to classes. It was ugly, and it smelled faintly of wet dog, but I paid for the insurance, the gas, and the oil changes myself. It was mine. 2 weeks after I bought that car, I came home from my diner shift to find my Honda Civic missing from the driveway. My mother was in the kitchen, casually sipping a glass of expensive wine and flipping through a fashion magazine. "Where's my car?" I had asked, panic instantly rising in my chest. "Oh, Leo missed the bus to his soccer practice," she said, not even bothering to look up from the glossy pages. "I found your spare key in your drawer and gave it to him. He just ran down the street." "Mom. He is 16. He doesn't have a license, he only has a learner's permit. He legally cannot drive alone." I screamed, terrified that he was going to kill someone. "Don't be so dramatic, Emma. He knows the local roads. He needed to get there, and you weren't using it." 3 agonizing hours later, Leo brought the car back. The entire front bumper was ripped off, dragging violently against the asphalt, and the passenger side headlight was completely smashed. He had panicked at a stop sign, hit the gas instead of the brake, and rear-ended our neighbor's pristine luxury sedan. I was furious. I demanded that Leo get a job to pay for the damages. But my mother intervened. Not to scold Leo, but to aggressively berate me. When the furious neighbor threatened a lawsuit, my mother didn't discipline her son. Instead, she marched into my bedroom while I was sleeping, took my bank book, forged my signature, and completely drained my hard-earned college fund to pay the neighbor under the table and keep the police from filing criminal charges against Leo. When I found out my account was empty, I fell to my knees and sobbed. I begged her not to take my future away. She stood over me, her face contorted in absolute disgust. "It is just money, Emma. Look at your brother, he is traumatized by the accident. Why do you care more about a stupid piece of paper than your own brother's criminal record? You are being incredibly greedy. You can always work more shifts. Leo is fragile." Greedy. That was her favorite weaponized word. Whenever I wanted to keep what I had earned, I was greedy. When Leo blew through the massive $60,000 a year private college fund that our father had set up, dropping out in his sophomore year because the curriculum stifled his creative energy, he was simply finding himself. When he came home with a brand new, $80,000 Audi that my mother had secretly co-signed for, pushing her into massive, suffocating credit card debt and almost losing her house, she called it an essential investment in his professional image. I never went to college. I couldn't afford it. I stayed at the auto shop. I swept the concrete floors, I learned how to rebuild carburetors by watching the old mechanics, I taught myself how to weld steel, and I saved every single penny I ever made. I built my life in the shadows, entirely independent from their toxic financial web. I realized very early on that the only person coming to save me was me. Fast forward to the present day, back at the wedding estate. The welcome rehearsal dinner was a blur of forced smiles, expensive champagne, and clinking glasses. The tension between my divorced parents felt like a literal demilitarized zone. Dad sat at one end of the absurdly long dining table, Mom sat at the other, and the air between them was practically vibrating with unspoken hatred. Leo was holding court at the center of the table, loudly bragging to my sister's new in-laws about a revolutionary tech startup that I knew for a fact did not exist, while Chloe live-streamed her plate of caviar to her followers, constantly checking her reflection in the phone screen. After dinner wrapped up, I was walking back toward the guest cottage I was staying in. I just wanted to take off my heels and sleep. As I passed the main garage, Leo stepped out of the shadows, cornering me. He dropped his voice, trying to put on his best, charismatic, little brother smirk. "Hey, Em. Wait up," he said, glancing nervously toward the main house where Chloe was standing on the patio. "Listen, about the taxi arriving earlier, that was super embarrassing. My BMW is in the shop for a custom wrap, so I had to improvise. But Chloe comes from real money. Old money. I need to show her I fit into this world." My stomach tightened. I already knew exactly where this was going. "Can I get the keys to your Porsche just for tonight?" Leo asked, clapping his hands together in a pleading gesture. "I just want to take Chloe down to the harbor for a drink. Show her the coastline sights. Your car has a great vintage vibe, it'll look amazing on her Instagram." It took everything in my power not to laugh directly in his face. It took exactly 5 minutes of him being on the property to ask for my keys. "No," I said flatly, not breaking my stride. "Come on, Maze, don't be like that," he whined, jogging to keep up with me. "It's just a car." "It is a manual transmission, Leo. You do not know how to drive a stick shift. You stripped the gears on my Jeep when you were 18, remember?" "I learned. I took a class, I'm totally good now," he lied seamlessly. I said no, I repeated, stopping and turning to face him firmly. "It stays parked in the garage until the procession on Saturday. I am not risking my property." Leo's face instantly darkened. The fake, charming smile evaporated, replaced by the ugly, entitled sneer I knew so well. "You're such a massive jerk, Emma. You always have to be the miserable gatekeeper. You can't stand seeing me happy." As if summoned by his distress, my mother materialized from the patio, her heels clicking aggressively on the stone path. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her eyes darting between us. "Emma won't let me borrow the Mustang to take Chloe to the harbor," Leo complained. He actually stomped his foot like a petulant toddler. My mother turned her glare onto me. Her eyes were ice cold and calculating. Emma, give him the keys right now. He is your brother. He is a guest here. We need to make a good impression on this girl's family. He does not know how to drive it, Mom. And I am not risking a car I spent 5 years building just so he can pretend to be rich on the internet, I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. Eleanor stepped closer, invading my personal space, lowering her voice into a venomous hiss so the remaining guests wouldn't hear. I do not care about your stupid little car. I care about this family looking united and successful. You are just a mechanic. You can fix whatever he breaks. Give him the keys. I looked at her. I saw the exact same woman who had stolen my college fund. The exact same woman who had always viewed my hard work, my salary, and my property as a disposable resource for her favorite child to consume and destroy. Absolutely not, I said. I turned on my heel and walked away. Behind me, I heard her soothing him, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Don't worry, sweetie. We will figure something out. Emma is just desperately jealous of your success. I walked straight into my father's temporary study. I checked the heavy wall safe. I inputted the code 1-9-6-1 and physically verified that the silver Ferrari key was resting safely inside. I locked it, spun the dial, and walked out to my cottage. I thought I had secured the perimeter. I thought that establishing a firm, undeniable boundary was the end of the conflict. But I was incredibly naive. I completely underestimated the profound depths of my mother's delusion, and exactly how far she would go, what laws she would break, to keep the illusion of her golden child alive. Around midnight, the temperature plummeted, and the coastal wind began to howl against the windows of the guest cottage. I couldn't sleep. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. A deep, unsettling instinct, a survival mechanism honed over decades of living with a master manipulator, pulled me out of bed. There is a very specific, nervous energy my mother projects when she has pulled a fast one. It's a hunched, guilty shuffle. I had seen her walking out of the hallway near Dad's study earlier that evening, clutching her purse tightly against her chest, her eyes darting away the second she saw me. I threw a heavy wool jacket over my pajamas and walked out into the freezing, salty night air. I didn't go to my car. I went straight to the main climate-controlled garage where my father had parked the rental. As I approached, my blood ran cold. The security keypad light next to the heavy metal door was blinking a steady, bright green. It was unlocked. My heart plummeted violently into my stomach. I punched the button and the heavy door rolled up with a mechanical hum. The space where the pristine, $4 million Ferrari 250 GT California had been sitting was completely, utterly empty. The soft cotton protective tarp was crumpled on the oily concrete floor in a heap, looking like a discarded wedding dress. No, I whispered to the empty room. No, no, no. I sprinted back to the main house, ignoring the gravel tearing at my bare feet. I took the grand staircase 2 steps at a time. I didn't bother knocking. I burst into my mother's bedroom, slamming the door against the wall. She was sitting peacefully at her ornate vanity mirror, humming a tune while applying expensive night cream to her neck. She jumped, dropping the jar onto the carpet. Emma! What on earth is wrong with you? She gasped. Where is he? I demanded, my voice shaking with a terrifying, uncontainable rage. Where is Leo? He went out, she said nonchalantly, turning back to the mirror and smoothing her hair. He and Chloe wanted to see the coastline by moonlight. They wanted to take some romantic photos. With what car, Mom? I took a step closer, towering over her sitting form. With what car? She sighed heavily, rolling her eyes as if I were a nagging child. I solved the problem, Emma. Since you were being so horribly selfish and difficult about your Porsche, I found the spare keys to your other car. The silver one. The room literally spun. The walls felt like they were closing in. Mom. I don't own a silver car. She paused, her hand freezing in midair. She looked at me through the mirror. Don't be ridiculous. I saw it in the garage. The little vintage convertible. I found the key resting on the desk in your father's study. He must have left it out by mistake. Mom, I choked out, my throat tight. That is not my car. That is the rental. The 1961 Ferrari. The one Dad rented specifically for Mia's wedding. Eleanor scoffed, waving a hand dismissively in the air, though I could hear the slight waver of uncertainty in her voice. Oh, whatever. It is just a car. It looks old, just like yours. What is the difference? The difference, I practically screamed, is that the commercial insurance policy strictly states that only Dad can drive it. If anyone else is behind the wheel, the coverage is entirely void. 0. If he crashes, Dad is personally liable for $4 million. Eleanor stopped breathing. She turned around slowly in her chair, her face draining of color. You're exaggerating. Rentals have insurance. It's just a fender bender at worst. How did you get the key? I demanded, leaning over her. Dad locked it in the safe. I watched him. The safe was open, she lied smoothly, her eyes darting away. I knew she lied. She knew Dad always used birth years for his passcodes. She had punched in Leo's birth year. Before I could interrogate her further, my phone vibrated violently in my pocket. It was a text message from a mutual friend back in the city. It contained a screenshot of an Instagram story. I opened the image, and my stomach dropped through the floorboards. It was a selfie of Chloe holding up a peace sign, her blonde hair blowing wildly in the wind. In the background, Leo was behind the wheel of the silver Ferrari, grinning like an absolute maniac, holding a bottle of champagne in one hand. The speedometer was clearly visible in the corner of the frame. He was doing 85 miles per hour on a winding, notoriously dangerous coastal road in a 60-year-old car with no power steering and outdated drum brakes. I didn't say another word to my mother. I turned and ran. I jumped into my Porsche, fired up the flat six engine, and peeled out of the driveway, tearing toward the coastal highway, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in that I would find them pulled over. 10 minutes later, as I rounded the treacherous bend near the lighthouse curve, I saw the flashing red and blue lights painting the trees in rhythmic bursts. Then, I saw the skid marks. Long, violent, black streaks of burnt rubber going completely sideways across the center lane, indicating a massive loss of control. And then, down the steep, grassy embankment, resting violently against the trunk of a massive oak tree, was the wreckage. The $4 million Ferrari was decimated. The front hood was folded backward like a crushed accordion. The custom, hand-rolled aluminum chassis was violently twisted. The front axle was completely snapped in half, the wheel resting 30 feet away. Steam and toxic-smelling smoke were hissing from the shattered engine bay. It was a total, unmitigated loss. Leo was sitting on the wet grass, clutching his wrist and groaning. There was a gash on his forehead, bleeding sluggishly. He absolutely reeked of expensive whiskey. Chloe was standing over him, completely unharmed but hysterical. She wasn't calling an ambulance. She was holding her phone out, live-streaming the aftermath to her followers. Oh my God, you guys, my boyfriend just crashed a Ferrari. We almost died. A stern-looking police officer, Sergeant Miller, was already on the scene, administering a field sobriety test to Leo, who was swaying violently and slurring his alphabet. Headlights cut through the darkness on the road above. My father's heavy SUV slammed to a halt, followed immediately by the screeching tires of my mother's Lexus. Dad stepped out, walking down the embankment with a terrifying, controlled slowness. He was wearing his pajamas under a heavy coat. He looked at the wreckage, pulled the rental agreement folder from his pocket, and remained dead silent. The financial gravity of the situation was settling over him like a tombstone. Eleanor practically fell out of her car, shrieking into the night. That's my son. Let me through. She scrambled down the hill in her expensive slippers, trying to push past the police line. "Ma'am, step back immediately," Sergeant Miller warned firmly, putting a hand on her shoulder. "We are conducting an investigation." He blew a .14. "He is under suspicion of driving under the influence." Eleanor spun around. Her eyes wildly scanned the scene, taking in the destroyed multi-million-dollar car, my father's murderous silence, and the handcuffs dangling from the officer's belt. She realized the monumental financial and legal ruin staring her directly in the face. She needed a way out. She needed her designated meat shield. She saw me standing quietly by the guardrail. Panic and pure, malicious desperation contorted her face into something demonic. She marched over to me, grabbed my arm with bruising force, and dragged me toward the police officer. "Officer!" Eleanor screamed, pointing her manicured finger directly at my face. Her voice echoed loudly over the crashing waves below. It was her. My daughter gave him the keys. She knew he had been drinking at the dinner, and she gave him the keys to her father's car because she is a jealous, bitter failure. She set her own brother up. Arrest her. The entire scene fell dead silent. The crackle of the police radio was the only sound. My father stared at her in utter, horrified disbelief. Leo, leaning against the police cruiser, looked down at his shoes, too cowardly to speak up and defend the sister who had never done anything but try to survive them. "Ma'am, is this true?" Sergeant Miller asked me, his hand resting cautiously on his utility belt, evaluating me as a suspect. My own mother was trying to send me to jail. She was trying to pin criminal liability, grand larceny, and a $4 million corporate lawsuit onto my shoulders, destroying my entire future, just to save the son who had committed the crime. The betrayal was so profound, so suffocatingly dark, that it completely bypassed anger. It bypassed sorrow. It settled into a strange, freezing, absolute calm within my chest. The daughter who craved her love died permanently in that exact second. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself with frantic, emotional pleas. "Officer," I said, my voice steady, cold, and devoid of any emotion. "I formally invoke my right to remain silent until my legal counsel is present. However, I strongly suggest you impound that vehicle immediately and process Mr. Vance for a blood alcohol test before the evidence metabolizes." I turned my back on my mother, who was staring at me with her mouth hanging open. I walked back up the embankment, got into my Porsche, and drove away, leaving them stranded in the flashing lights of their own destruction. The drive back to the estate was eerily, unnervingly quiet. The heater in my Porsche was blasting, but I felt freezing cold from the inside out. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark white, but my mind was operating with the laser precision of a military tactician. When you spend your entire life being the scapegoat of a narcissistic family, you learn a very hard, very ugly lesson. You learn to stop relying on the truth to protect you. Toxic people do not care about the truth, they only care about the narrative they can spin to protect their fragile egos. If I went to the police station and simply told my side of the story, that my mother stole the keys and handed them to a drunk driver, it would just be my word against hers. She would cry, she would play the victim, she would manipulate the timeline, and my enabler brother would back her up. If I was going to survive this, I couldn't just tell my story. I had to utterly obliterate theirs with absolute, irrefutable, unarguable proof. I pulled my car into the driveway of the guest cottage, locked the heavy oak door behind me, and immediately opened my laptop on the kitchen island. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the massive dump of adrenaline flooding my system. I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah. Sarah wasn't just my best friend, she was a ruthless corporate attorney who specialized in contract law and liability. She picked up on the second ring, her voice groggy. "Emma? It's 2 a.m. What's wrong?" "Sarah, we have a code red," I said, my voice flat and businesslike. "Leo just totaled the California." There was a sharp, audible intake of breath on the other end of the line. The sleep instantly vanished from her voice. Is he dead? No. He has a broken wrist and he is currently being booked for a DUI and reckless endangerment, I reported. But that is not the primary issue. Eleanor just told the police, on the official record at the scene of the crash, that I intentionally handed him the keys to set him up. Dad's personal insurance is going to reject the claim immediately due to the unauthorized driver and the DUI clauses. Dad is going to be held personally liable for a $4 million replacement cost, and Eleanor is actively trying to shift the criminal and financial blame onto me to save Leo. Okay, Sarah said, the clicking of her keyboard already echoing through the speaker as she went into full lawyer mode. Let her talk. Do not interfere with the police investigation right now. Do not send her angry text messages. Let her dig her own grave. Do we have the footage? I logged into the highly encrypted cloud server on my laptop. Checking the feeds right now. What my mother, my father, and my brother did not know, what nobody in my family knew, was that my life as a lowly, grease monkey mechanic was a carefully curated, highly strategic boundary I had built to keep their toxic greed away from my real assets. Yes, I owned a restoration shop. But 5 years ago, I had leveraged the massive success of that shop to secure a multi-million-dollar business loan, partnered with 2 silent investors I met at a classic car auction, and founded Vintage Exotics, an ultra-exclusive classic car rental company that catered specifically to high-net-worth individuals, billionaires, and major film studios. I didn't just fix cars for the wealthy. I owned the fleet. And that pristine 1961 Ferrari 250 GT California that my father had rented through a luxury concierge broker? That broker had subcontracted the vehicle directly from Vintage Exotics. My company owned that car. The title was held in an LLC that I controlled. My father was currently holding a rental contract that, ultimately, owed money directly to me. And because these vehicles were worth tens of millions of dollars collectively, I was exceptionally paranoid about security, especially when delivering them to off-site locations. I had personally arrived at the estate a day early and installed high-definition, motion-activated, audio-enabled hidden cameras in the corners of the main garage, disguised as smoke detectors, just to keep an eye on my corporate assets. I clicked on the video timeline for 11:45 p.m. The video buffered for an agonizing second, then played in crystal clear 1080p resolution. I held my breath. There she was. Eleanor, sneaking into the garage in her silk pajamas, illuminated brightly by the moonlight streaming through the windows. The sensitive audio microphones picked up her muttering angrily to herself. I watched in cold fascination as she walked directly to my father's temporary study door, which he had carelessly left unlocked. I watched her punch the code into the wall safe. She didn't hesitate. She typed in 1-9-9-9. Leo's birth year. The safe beeped open instantly. She reached in, grabbed the silver Ferrari key fob, and walked back out to the garage where Leo was stumbling near the door, visibly intoxicated and leaning against the wall for support. Take this one, her voice echoed clearly through my laptop speakers, sharp and vicious. Emma won't let you use hers because she's a bitter, greedy little girl who wants to ruin your night. Take the silver convertible. Go show that girl what kind of family you come from, Leo. Have fun. I hit the pause button. I stared at the frozen image of my mother handing a deadly weapon to an intoxicated driver. I had her. I had her on high-definition video committing burglary, admitting her malicious motive, and facilitating a felony. I have the footage, Sarah, I said, my voice practically humming with electric adrenaline. It is perfect. Crystal clear audio. Downloaded in triplicate. Send a copy to my encrypted server right now, Sarah instructed sharply. What is the play here, Emma? We can march into the precinct and file criminal charges against her by sunrise. We can end this today. No, I said, staring deeply into the paused frame of my mother's cruel face. If I give this to the police right now, she will just hire an expensive defense attorney. She will cry in front of a sympathetic judge, claim temporary insanity, or say it was a terrible misunderstanding. She will use Dad's money to settle it quietly. I don't want a quiet settlement. I want her to feel the exact, crushing weight of what she tried to do to me. We wait until the damage assessment meeting. The next morning, the sun rose over the coastal estate as if a massive, life-altering crime hadn't just occurred. The caterers were setting up white chairs on the lawn. But inside the main house, it felt like a funeral home. Leo was sitting in a holding cell at the county jail, unbailable until a judge saw him on Monday morning. Chloe, the influencer girlfriend, had called an Uber from the hospital waiting room, posted a tearful, highly edited video about escaping toxic, chaotic energy, and promptly blocked Leo on every single social media platform. I put on my silk bridesmaid dress, applied my makeup, and helped my sister Mia get ready for her walk down the aisle. I didn't say a single word about the night before. I smiled warmly for the photographer. I acted as if I was entirely, blissfully unaffected by the fact that a $4 million lawsuit was hanging over my head. Just before the ceremony began, my phone rang in my purse. It was Uncle Thomas, Eleanor's older brother and the chief enabler of the entire extended family. I tapped the record button on my screen before answering. Emma, his voice was stern, patronizing, and dripping with misplaced authority. Your mother is having a complete nervous breakdown in her bedroom. The police are actively looking into the stolen vehicle report. You need to do the right thing and go down to the station right now. The right thing? I asked coolly, checking my lipstick in the mirror. Tell them you left the safe open. Tell them you gave Leo permission to take the car, Thomas demanded. Your mother cannot handle a grand larceny investigation at her age. You are young, you can take a misdemeanor charge. You owe her this, Emma. She gave you life. She raised you. She didn't raise me, Thomas. She drained my bank account so her son could play pretend, and I raised myself, I replied, my voice devoid of any warmth. I am not taking a felony charge to cover up her crimes. I hung up the phone and blocked his number. I looked at my reflection in the mirror one last time. For 34 years, I had shrunk my personality, my success, and my voice to fit into their comfortable, abusive narrative. I had let them call me greedy, useless, and a help. I checked the small, zippered pocket of my purse. The sleek black USB drive containing the security footage, the audio recordings, and the corporate ownership documents for vintage exotics was resting safely inside. The storm wasn't over. It was just gathering strength out over the ocean. And I was the one holding the lightning. The wedding weekend finished in a suffocating, bizarre haze of forced smiles and whispered rumors. Mia managed to walk down the aisle and have her beautiful reception, but the dark cloud of a multi-million-dollar disaster hung over the estate like a physical weight. My father, Arthur, moved through the crowds like a ghost. He didn't drink. He barely spoke. He was mentally calculating the utter devastation of his financial portfolio. Eleanor, however, paraded around the reception in a designer gown, drinking expensive champagne, acting as if her son hadn't just committed a felony that could bankrupt her ex-husband. She completely ignored me, which was fine. I used the time to mentally prepare for the absolute slaughter that was going to happen on Monday morning. At 9 o'clock sharp on Monday, I walked through the heavy glass doors of my father's corporate legal firm in downtown Boston. I was flanked by Sarah, my best friend, and my incredibly ruthless corporate attorney. The law office smelled of expensive mahogany, leather bindings, and serious money. We were escorted into a massive corner conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Dad was already sitting at the head of the long glass table. He looked like he had aged 10 years over the weekend. The dark circles under his eyes were deep, and he was staring blankly at a thick stack of manila folders. 10 minutes later, the heavy wooden door swung open, and the villains of my story made their grand entrance. Eleanor walked in first, wearing a pristine white cashmere coat, holding a Birkin bag that I strongly suspected she bought on a high-interest credit card, and sporting oversized designer sunglasses indoors. She looked like she was arriving for a country club luncheon, not a legal reckoning. Trailing behind her was Leo. His right arm was secured in a thick medical sling, and he had a white bandage taped over the gash on his forehead. Despite facing severe criminal charges, he was still wearing a custom-fitted suit, and the distinct smell of expensive, overpowering cologne filled the room. They sat down on the opposite side of the massive glass table. Eleanor casually crossed her legs, took off her sunglasses, and let out a long, dramatic sigh. "Arthur, can we please make this quick?" Eleanor said, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "Leo has an appointment with a private orthopedic specialist at noon, and the media fallout from Chloe's ridiculous internet videos is giving me a massive migraine. We need to figure out how we are handling this little insurance hiccup." A little insurance hiccup. She was talking about a $4 million destroyed hypercar like it was a dented fender on a minivan. I sat back in my leather chair, keeping my face entirely blank, letting the tape recorder in my mind capture every single word. "This is not a hiccup, Eleanor," my father said, his voice dangerously low, vibrating with suppressed fury. He didn't even look at her, he just stared at the paperwork in front of him. "I received the official determination letter from the commercial insurance underwriter at 7 o'clock this morning. They sent an emergency claims adjuster to the impound lot yesterday." Eleanor rolled her eyes. "Well, obviously they are going to pay for it. That is literally why you buy premium insurance, Arthur. You are a wealthy man. Just sign whatever forms they need, pay the deductible, and let's get Leo's legal defense sorted out. Speaking of which, the criminal defense lawyer I consulted requires a $50,000 retainer by tomorrow morning." She didn't stop there. The sheer audacity of her next move still blows my mind to this day. She turned her icy glare directly toward me. "Since Arthur is handling the car situation," Eleanor continued, her tone dripping with absolute authority, "Emma, you are going to liquidate your little garage business. Or take out a loan against your salary. I don't care how you do it, but you are providing the $50,000 for your brother's bail and legal fees." I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she snapped, leaning forward. "This entire disaster is your fault. If you hadn't been so insanely jealous and greedy, if you had just let him borrow your stupid old Porsche like a supportive sister, none of this would have happened. You left the safe open. You handed him the keys to your father's rental out of pure spite. So, you are going to pay for his lawyer, or I will personally see to it that you are completely cut off from this family." She was entirely self-satisfied. She sat back, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips, fully believing she had completely cornered me. She thought she was the puppet master, dictating terms, using her golden child's crimes to finally strip me of the one thing I loved, my business. My father finally looked up from his papers. His eyes were cold, dead, and terrifying. "Nobody is selling anything to pay for his lawyer," Dad said, his voice echoing sharply off the glass walls. "And nobody is paying a deductible. Because the insurance company formally denied the claim." The smug smile instantly vanished from Eleanor's face. Leo physically shrank back into his expensive leather chair, suddenly looking very small. "What do you mean, denied?" Eleanor demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "You are Arthur Vance. They can't deny you. Sue them. Threaten a massive lawsuit. Threaten to pull your commercial real estate accounts." Dad slid a single, crisp piece of paper across the long glass table. "Clause 4.1 of the Commercial Exotic Rental Agreement," he read aloud, his voice steady but hollow. "Coverage is valid only if the vehicle is operated exclusively by the signatory, Arthur Vance. Operation by any other party, authorized or unauthorized, instantly renders all collision and liability coverage null and void. The renter assumes full, personal liability for the total replacement value of the vehicle, plus loss of use fees, plus administrative and legal damages." Dad looked up, locking eyes with Eleanor. "And even if I had magically added Leo to the policy, the fact that he was driving under the influence of alcohol, blowing nearly twice the legal limit, voids the policy entirely on criminal grounds." The insurance company is walking away completely clean. They are not paying a single dime. The room fell into a deathly, suffocating silence. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning vent above us. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. So, what does that mean? Leo stammered, his voice cracking with genuine terror for the first time. It means, Sarah, my lawyer, spoke up for the first time, her voice perfectly polite but sharp as a scalpel, that your father is personally liable for a debt of $4.2 million. And the rental agency's legal team is already preparing to file a massive lawsuit to seize his assets, his properties, and his business capital to cover the loss. $4 million. Eleanor whispered, the color completely draining from her face. She looked at Dad, panic setting in. Arthur, you can't pay that. It will ruin you. It will ruin my alimony. It will ruin the inheritance. Even in the face of total destruction, she was only worried about her own paycheck and the money she felt entitled to when he died. I am not going to let them ruin me, Dad said, his jaw tight. The legal strategy is simple. The insurance company won't cover it because the keys were stolen. So, I am filing a civil suit for grand larceny, property destruction, and extreme negligence against the person who stole the keys from my safe and handed them to a drunk driver. Dad turned his dead eyes toward Eleanor. Which means I am suing you, Eleanor. For $4 million. I will take your house. I will take your savings. I will leave you with absolutely nothing. Eleanor leaped out of her chair, her face contorted in absolute terror and rage. You can't do that. We have a divorce decree. You can't touch my assets. She pointed a shaking finger directly at my face, her voice escalating into a hysterical shriek. It was her. I told the police at the scene. Emma left the safe open. Emma gave him the keys. She is trying to frame me. She set him up because she hates him. Sue her. Take her pathetic little garage. She was screaming now, completely unhinged, throwing her own daughter to the wolves to save her mansion and her lifestyle. Leo just sat there, looking at the floor, perfectly willing to let me take the fall for his crime. I looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at me and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. I didn't yell back. I didn't defend myself. I slowly unzipped the side pocket of my leather tote bag. I reached inside, my fingers brushing against the cool, smooth metal of a small, black USB flash drive. I pulled it out, leaned forward, and placed it directly in the center of the massive glass table with a soft, definitive click. You really should have checked the garage for cameras, Mom, I said. My voice was so quiet, so perfectly calm, that the contrast to her hysterical screaming made the hair on the back of Leo's neck stand up. The trap was fully set, the bait was taken, and the steel jaws were about to snap shut with enough force to shatter their entire reality. Eleanor froze. Her manicured finger, still pointing aggressively at my face, slowly lowered to the table. Her eyes darted from my perfectly calm expression to the small, black USB drive resting on the pristine glass, and then back to me. What is that?" she stammered, the manufactured outrage in her voice suddenly replaced by a very real, very raw tremor of fear. "That," Sarah interjected, smoothly leaning forward and sliding the USB drive toward her laptop, "is the absolute, undeniable truth." Sarah plugged the drive into her computer and hit a button on the conference room control panel. The massive 80-inch flat-screen monitor mounted on the mahogany wall behind my father flickered to life. The room's motorized blinds automatically lowered, plunging us into a dramatic, cinematic dimness. The video file loaded. The screen displayed a crystal-clear, high-definition, 1080p security feed. It was a wide-angle shot of the main garage at the rental estate, completely illuminated by the bright, motion-activated security lights and the pale moonlight streaming through the high windows. The timestamp in the bottom right corner read 11:46 p.m., Thursday night. On the massive screen, Eleanor Vance walked into the frame. She was wearing her expensive silk pajamas, clutching her phone. The sensitive, high-fidelity audio microphones I had installed picked up the sound of her expensive slippers scuffing against the polished concrete floor. It picked up her erratic breathing. My father sat entirely motionless, staring at the screen as if watching a ghost. Leo looked physically sick, his face turning a distinct shade of pale green. On the video, Eleanor walked purposefully toward my father's temporary study. She paused at the door, looked around to ensure nobody was watching, and slipped inside. The camera angle perfectly captured the interior of the study through the open doorway. We all watched in high-definition silence as my mother approached the wall safe. She didn't hesitate. She didn't guess. She swiftly punched in a 4-digit code. 1-9-9-9, Leo's birth year. The safe let out a sharp, electronic beep that echoed loudly through the conference room speakers. "You stole my passcode," my father whispered, his voice laced with profound disgust. "You deliberately broke into a secured vault." On the screen, Eleanor pulled the heavy silver key fob out of the safe, closed the heavy steel door, and walked back out into the main garage. Leo stumbled into the frame. He was visibly swaying, struggling to keep his balance, holding a half-empty glass of amber liquid. Then came the audio. The damning, inescapable audio. "Take this one," Eleanor's voice hissed from the speakers, dripping with venom and entitlement. "Emma won't let you use hers because she's a bitter, greedy little girl who wants to ruin your night. Take the silver convertible. Go show that girl what kind of family you come from, Leo. Have fun." Leo grabbed the keys, giggled drunkenly, and the video feed cut to black. Sarah hit a button, and the motorized blinds hummed back open, flooding the room with harsh, unforgiving daylight. The silence that followed was heavier than a concrete vault. There was no spinning this. There was no manipulation tactic, no crying, no playing the victim that could erase high-definition video and crystal-clear audio of a premeditated felony. Eleanor was hyperventilating. Her chest heaved, and she gripped the edges of the glass table so hard her knuckles turned stark white. Her elaborate house of cards had just been hit by a Category 5 hurricane. "Well," Dad finally said, breaking the silence. He closed his manila folder. "That certainly streamlines the civil lawsuit. My attorneys will use this footage to formally transfer the entire $4 million liability debt directly to your name, Eleanor. You committed burglary, you facilitated grand theft auto, and you handed a deadly weapon to a grossly intoxicated individual. The rental agency will strip you down to the studs of your house." Eleanor panicked. Her brain, desperate to survive, completely short-circuited. She abandoned all logic and resorted to her baseline instinct, weaponized privilege. "Fine." Eleanor shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. "Fine. I took the key. So what? It's just a stupid car. It's a piece of metal. Arthur, you are worth tens of millions of dollars. You can easily afford this. Just write a check to whatever nameless, faceless corporate rental agency owns the stupid thing, and we can all go home and move on with our lives. I am not letting you take my house over a car." She still thought she was untouchable. She still thought money could just act as a magical eraser for her horrific behavior. I looked at Sarah. Sarah gave me a brilliant, shark-like smile. It was time for the kill shot. "You are absolutely right about one thing, Eleanor," Sarah said smoothly, opening her sleek leather briefcase. She pulled out 3 thick, professionally bound legal documents, dropping one in front of my father, one in front of Leo, and sliding the final one directly in front of my mother. "It is just a car. But you are fundamentally incorrect about who owns it." Eleanor stared at the document. The cover page was embossed with a silver crest, Vintage Exotics, LLC. Certificate of Incorporation and Executive Shareholder Registry. "What is this?" Eleanor demanded, refusing to open the folder. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the glass table, completely invading her space. I locked eyes with the woman who had tormented me for 34 years. That is a legally binding corporate registry, Mom, I said, my voice dropping into a register of absolute, icy authority. 5 years ago, while you were busy co-signing luxury cars for Leo and burying yourself in credit card debt, I took the profits from my pathetic little garage and I secured a massive commercial loan. I partnered with 2 billionaire investors I met at a classic car auction in Monterey. I tapped my fingernail against the cover of the document. I founded a company called Vintage Exotics. We are an ultra-exclusive, private fleet management firm. We supply multi-million-dollar vintage automobiles to movie studios, high-net-worth individuals, and luxury concierge brokers. My father's eyes widened behind his reading glasses. He opened the folder, quickly scanning the legal text, his jaw dropping slightly as he realized exactly what he was reading. The broker you used to rent the Ferrari for Mia's wedding, Dad? I looked at him, giving him a respectful nod. They subcontracted the vehicle directly from my company's inventory. The title to that 1961 Ferrari 250 GT California is held by an LLC. I turned my gaze back to my mother, who was currently staring at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. And I am the president, founder, and majority shareholder of that LLC, I stated, letting every single word land with the weight of a sledgehammer. I am the CEO you always wanted your son to be. Eleanor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The realization was physically breaking her brain. You aren't dealing with a faceless corporate rental agency, Mom, I continued, my voice merciless and perfectly steady. You aren't dealing with a customer service hotline you can scream at until you get your way. You are dealing with me. You broke into a safe, stole my property, handed it to a drunk driver, and destroyed an irreplaceable piece of automotive history that belonged to my corporation. No, Eleanor whispered, shaking her head violently in denial. No, that's impossible. You're a mechanic. You sweep floors. You don't have that kind of money. I have exactly that kind of money, I corrected her coldly. Because I actually worked for it, instead of stealing it from my children. I sat back in my chair, smoothing the fabric of my skirt. So, here is how this is going to work. My corporate legal team is filing a lawsuit against Dad for the breach of contract. Dad's legal team is going to use the video evidence to immediately subrogate the entire $4 million liability onto you and Leo. You owe me $4 million, Eleanor. Plus legal fees. Plus loss of use revenue. I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. And let me be incredibly clear. I am not offering a payment plan. I am not taking installments. I want the total sum in full, within 30 days, or I am instructing my lawyers to seize your real estate, drain your bank accounts, and force you into involuntary bankruptcy. Have a wonderful afternoon. I turned and walked out of the mahogany conference room, leaving my toxic mother suffocating in the absolute ruins of the life she had destroyed with her own 2 hands. The fallout from that Monday morning meeting was swift, brutal, and entirely merciless. I didn't have to lift another finger. The gears of the legal system and the sheer weight of their own terrible financial decisions did all the heavy lifting for me. Within 48 hours, my father officially filed a massive civil lawsuit against Eleanor and Leo, attaching the high-definition security footage as Exhibit A. He formally requested the court to place an immediate, freezing lien on Eleanor's massive, 4-bedroom lake house to secure the $4 million debt she now owed to my corporation. Eleanor thought she had a safety net. She assumed that, at worst, she would be forced to sell the sprawling lake house she had fought so viciously to keep in the divorce, downsize to a luxury condo, and pay off the debt with the leftover equity. But then, the second, catastrophic twist of her own making was revealed. When the court-appointed forensic accountants dug into Eleanor's finances to assess the value of the estate, they discovered a gaping, bleeding hole. The lake house was completely, utterly worthless to her. Unbeknownst to anyone in the family, Eleanor had quietly taken out a massive, predatory second mortgage on the property 2 years prior. She hadn't used the money for renovations or investments. She had taken out nearly $800,000 in cash to secretly fund Leo's revolutionary tech startup, a company that never produced a single line of code, had no product, and spectacularly imploded after Leo spent the seed money on chartered jets to Miami and VIP club appearances. She was completely underwater. The bank held the primary note, the second mortgage company held the rest, and now my corporate lawyers were standing at the back of the line holding a $4 million judgment. The primary bank caught wind of the massive incoming civil liability lawsuit and immediately panicked. They called in her loans. Within a month, Eleanor was forced into absolute, total bankruptcy. The bank foreclosed on the lake house, evicting her with 30 days' notice. Her luxury Lexus was repossessed in the middle of the night from her driveway. She lost everything. The country club memberships were revoked. The high-limit credit cards were cancelled. She was forced to pack whatever clothes she could fit into rented garbage bags and move into a depressing, cramped, one-bedroom apartment situated directly next to a roaring interstate highway. She had to take a minimum-wage job working the perfume counter at a dying department store just to afford groceries. Leo's descent was equally spectacular. He pleaded guilty to driving under the influence and reckless endangerment. Because it was technically his first criminal offense, his highly paid defense attorney, whom he had to secure with a public defender after Dad cut him off, managed to negotiate a plea deal that kept him out of state prison. But he didn't walk away clean. He was sentenced to 3 years of strict probation, 500 hours of grueling, manual labor community service, and his driver's license was completely revoked for 2 full years. To make matters worse, Chloe, the influencer girlfriend, realized the Vance family money was a total illusion. She posted a vicious, highly edited, 20-minute viral video titled "Surviving a Toxic Narcissist and a Near-Death Ferrari Crash." She exposed Leo as a broke fraud who lived off his mother's credit cards. The internet absolutely shredded him. His fake reputation in the city was permanently obliterated. 3 months after the crash, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor showed up at my restoration shop. I was in the office, reviewing quarterly financial reports, when she walked through the door. She looked completely broken. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting raincoat. Her hair was frizzy, and the arrogant, superior fire in her eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a desperate, hollow panic. She walked up to my desk, tears streaming down her face, playing the ultimate victim card. "Emma, please," she sobbed, reaching out to touch my hand. "Please, you have to stop the lawyers. They took my house. They took my car. I have nothing left. I'm your mother. You can't do this to me. You have millions of dollars, you don't need this money. Please, just forgive the debt. Have a heart." I didn't flinch. I didn't pull my hand away, but I didn't comfort her either. I looked at her with the cold, detached observation of a scientist studying an insect. "You aren't crying because you are sorry for what you did to me, Mom," I said, my voice incredibly soft but entirely unyielding. "You are only crying because you ran out of money and you finally got caught. If there were no cameras in that garage, you would have happily watched me go to prison for Leo's crime." I opened my desk drawer, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and slid it across the desk toward her. "What is this?" she whispered, her hands shaking. "That is a legally binding, court-ordered restraining order," I stated firmly. "You are no longer allowed within 500 feet of me, my home, or my business properties. If you call me, if you text me, or if you show up here again, my security team will have you arrested for trespassing and harassment." I stood up and pointed toward the glass door. "The exit is behind you. Do not ever come back." She stared at me, realizing for the absolute first time in her life that her tears had zero currency. Her manipulation tactics were useless against a fortress of boundaries. She turned around, her shoulders slumped in total defeat, and walked out into the pouring rain. I watched her leave, and I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. I just felt clean. A full year passed. The dust settled, the lawsuits were finalized, and the agonizing noise of my toxic family was finally replaced by the peaceful, rhythmic hum of my restoration shop. I was thriving. Vintage Exotics opened a new branch in Los Angeles, and my personal shop was booked 2 years out with high-profile clients. One crisp morning in late October, the heavy bell above the shop door rang. I looked up from a carburetor rebuild expecting a delivery driver. Instead, I saw Leo. I almost didn't recognize him. The tailored silk suits and designer loafers were gone. He was wearing heavy, scuffed steel-toed work boots, faded denim jeans, and a plain gray hoodie. He looked thinner, deeply exhausted, but strangely solid. He didn't swagger in. He walked quietly up to my workbench, taking off his cheap baseball cap. "Hey, Em," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of its usual arrogant baseline. "Leo," I replied cautiously, resting my wrench on the table. "You aren't supposed to be here. You know I don't want the drama." "I know," he nodded, looking down at his calloused hands. "I'm not here to ask for a loan. I'm not here to ask for a handout. I took the bus for 2 hours to get here." He took a deep breath. "I need a job, Emma. A real job. Nobody in the corporate sector will hire me with a felony reckless endangerment charge on my record. The community service is over, but I have thousands of dollars in court fees and probation fines. I know I owe you millions, and I know I can never pay it back. But I want to start. I'll sweep the floors. I'll clean the grease traps. I'll do whatever you tell me to do." I studied him. For the first time in 26 years, he wasn't looking for a shortcut. The golden child had finally hit rock bottom, and surprisingly, the impact seemed to have knocked some sense into him. "You want a job?" I asked, grabbing a heavy, rough sanding block from the shelf. I tossed it to him. He caught it awkwardly with his good hand. "There is a rusted 1972 Corvette fender in the back bay. It needs to be manually wet sanded down to the bare fiberglass. It is grueling, miserable, monotonous work. I pay minimum wage for shop assistants. No breaks until the section is smooth. You complain once, and you are fired." Leo looked at the sanding block, then looked at me. A tiny, genuine smile cracked his tired face. "Yes, ma'am." It was the hardest thing he had ever done. For the first 3 weeks, I watched him struggle. Wet sanding forces you to confront your mistakes layer by layer. His fingers blistered, popped, and bled. But he didn't quit. He wrapped his bleeding fingers in electrical tape and kept sanding. He showed up at 6 a.m. every single day. He was learning, through pure, agonizing physical labor, the actual value of $1. 2 months into his employment, the ultimate test arrived. Eleanor found out where he was working. She barged into the shop, completely ignoring my restraining order, marching straight into the back bay where Leo was covered in fiberglass dust. "Leo! What are you doing?" she shrieked, horrified by his dirty clothes. "You don't have to do this. I met a man, an investor. He wants to fund a new travel app idea. He will give you a salary. You can be a CEO again. Let's go." I stepped out of my office, phone in hand, ready to call the police. But I stopped. I wanted to see what Leo would do. Leo slowly stood up. He wiped his sweaty forehead with a dirty rag, leaving a streak of gray dust across his face. He looked at the woman who had enabled his worst instincts for his entire life. "No, Mom," Leo said, his voice incredibly steady. "I'm not going anywhere." "Leo, please," she begged, trying to grab his arm. "She is humiliating you. You are a Vance. You are better than this manual labor." Leo stepped back, pulling his arm away from her toxic grip. "I'm not better than this. I totaled a $4 million car. I almost killed Chloe. I almost sent my sister to prison. You didn't protect me, Mom. You crippled me. If you had just let me fail when I crashed Emma's Honda Civic 10 years ago, I wouldn't be a convicted felon today. Go away, Mom. I have a fender to finish." Eleanor stood there, completely stunned. Her ultimate source of validation, her golden child, had just explicitly rejected her. She looked at me, a ghost of a woman with no power left, turned around, and walked out of the shop forever. The true healing began that Thanksgiving. Dad hosted dinner at his new, much smaller, but peaceful townhouse. It was just the three of us, me, Dad, and Leo, who had taken the bus to get there. After dinner, Dad sat us down in the living room. He pulled a thick legal folder from his briefcase. "I have finalized my estate planning," Dad announced, putting his reading glasses on. "I have established an irrevocable trust to hold all of my commercial real estate assets and my liquid capital. The inheritance structure is incredibly specific." He looked directly at Leo, who tensed up immediately. "The trust will be split, but not evenly," Dad explained. "Emma is receiving complete, unmitigated majority control of the entire estate as the primary trustee. She has the business acumen, and she earned it. Leo, you will receive a 40% minority share of the quarterly dividends. However, that salary is entirely conditional. You only receive your dividend if you maintain full-time employment, and if you pass a randomized, mandatory drug and alcohol test every 6 months. If you fail or if you quit your job, Emma has the full legal authority to freeze your accounts indefinitely. It is a safety net, Leo, not a hammock." Leo looked at the paperwork. He didn't argue. He didn't throw a tantrum. He looked at me, a profound, heavy respect in his eyes. "Put it all in Emma's name," Leo said quietly. Dad raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "Put the entire trust in Emma's name," Leo repeated, nodding firmly. "If I earn it, she will take care of me. If I relapse, or if I turn back into the entitled brat I used to be, I want her to have the absolute power to cut me off completely. I don't trust myself with millions of dollars yet. But I trust her." I felt a massive lump form in my throat. I looked at the man sitting across from me. He wasn't the golden child anymore. He was the little brother I had always wanted. Forgiveness does not mean a free pass. It does not mean erasing the past. True forgiveness is allowing people the space to suffer the consequences of their actions so they can finally grow up. I lost my mother to her own narcissistic greed, but in the ruins of that relationship, I salvaged a brother, and I secured my own absolute freedom. I built my empire in the shadows, and when the family tried to drag me down into the dirt, I buried them with the very success they tried to sabotage. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to be the villain in their story just to survive your own? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And please, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Remember, family is a title you earn with respect, not a right you demand with blood. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next video.